Hello everyone, this is Soviet Bear and my regular guest Joaquin Flores. Um, so this video is actually a response to our friend 108 Morris 108, who was a good guy, but he kind of has gone in a wrong direction right now, especially on the subject of Syria. He was good on Ukraine, but on Syria, well, we just I just don't know what happened to him, and he thinks that ISIS has at least some legitimacy, which is total false. And he said Russia is an enemy of Islam, and Putin is an enemy of Islam, and he respects Islam more than Putin does. And then he accused such news networks as RT Russia Today and Press TV of fabricating photos and videos of ISIS atrocities. So, Joaquin, what can you say? Because I don't know what has happened to him.
Well, the first thing I will say is that I have no bad feelings towards the guy. I still like him. If he got some medical issue tomorrow, I would do the same thing I did last year. I really don't judge people on that level. I mean, he's not shooting at anybody or hurting anybody. I think that his intentions are honest. I don't think he's lying. I think that just how he sees the world, and I respect that. And I've never accused him of any moral failings or anything like that. And I just want to. So I want to say that I only speak for myself. So I spoke on the air, YouTube, whatever, with Rye Dawson, who is a popular, I think, libertarian blogger and has a important website and does activism around, I think, state issues of the state and Zionism. And he said things on his show, and it's his show, and those were his impressions, and I was on his show. It doesn't make all of my impressions the same as his, and all the things that you said are what you said, and I can't confirm. I didn't see the video that you're talking about, so I can only speak for me. So I just want to clarify that there's no gang up here, and there's no ill will. And this is about a response to his video where he says that that the truth has no friends.
Yeah, you stick to the truth, and then you lose your friends. And he said, because some of these friends are adamantly pro-Russian, and I never hide the fact that I am indeed adamantly pro-Russian guy, and I do very pro-Russian videos, and my views are very pro-Russian because I cannot betray Russia. No,
right, it's your country, right?
Yeah, I do realize that Russia is not perfect, that our government is not perfect, and Putin himself is not perfect. But still, my loyalty is to Russia and to Russia only. And I believe what Russia does right now in Syria, in the Middle East, is 100% right thing. Russia is ridding the world of ISIS, the most radical terror group ever existed, and the most radical terror group that was ever created by the CIA and all that stuff, because we know who are the creators of ISIS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, on my end, I'm not exactly pro-Russian per se. I mean, it comes off that way. I think a lot of people perceive that because they met me talking about Russia. If they had met me 10 years before that, they would say I was definitely pro-Arab. They'd say I was pro-Iraqi. They'd say I was pro-Palestinian. Now they say I'm pro-Russian, pro-Syrian. I'm not pro any of these things, so I'm just I have my own view of the world and about how development is working and the sort of this drama history that the human experience collectively or individually is playing out over time in history, what we call. And I definitely see problems American global hegemony, and I think that it's very healthy to have other centers of power in the world that can give balance and can provide some competition. Sometimes it's war, but it can also produce breakthroughs in medicine and in technology and in the human endeavor, and can lead to more fulfilling human experience and a stronger human spirit. And so so I think that if Russia and China or Iran or any of these countries are able to make their own stake in the world, then you will have a more balanced, kind of a multipolar global system, because the unipolar system is definitely on the way out, and definitely right now all the questions are being asked about the redivision of basically spheres of influence in the world, and it may lead to bigger conflict. I don't want to see bigger warlike conflict, but it may happen. And like yourself, I don't. My passport is American, so I just I criticize the United States government. That's my right. I don't feel like I have a very strong right to criticize Russia or Saudi Arabia. You see, but I can point out, I can criticize when Saudi Arabia invades another country, or I can point out that they're the financiers of some operation, but I don't tell the Saudis, or I don't tell Arabians that they should overthrow the Saudis. I don't offer recommendations for people in other places that I've never been to, that I don't live in. In Serbia, I've thrown my lot in with the Serbs, so I am in Serbia. I do engage in Serbian politics. I write. I'm active. I have a lot of contacts. I promote different projects. I've been successful to a certain extent at it, certainly very successful. So for someone who's only been in the country for a few years, doesn't have the language yet. And I'm happy that I've been able to do it. But I do intend on owning property and having children, things like that here. So you're going to have to fight for your children and by extension your country when you're in a place. But that said, I don't share with you any patriotic feeling about Russia. And so, but I think that lends credibility to what I'm saying, because I think in a way it allows me to be more objective, because Look, now that the whole, dust is settled and everything with Ukraine, for example, I was maybe the first one on the internet, at least in the English language, saying anywhere, yeah, you know what, Russia did kind of invade Ukraine, but first of all, they did it in such and such a way that's not against international law, and secondly, they did it in such and such a way that they had to, and the fact that they were able to convince enough people that they hadn't, is also part of the right that they earned to do it, because that's my theory of how the world works and how power really works. But that cuts against a lot of the narrative that Russia didn't invade Ukraine, or that Russia didn't annex Crimea. Let's be honest. If the little green men weren't there, if the friendly strangers weren't there to secure the country, then you couldn't have had a referendum. You would have had the Ukrainian military moving in the next day. As soon as the governmental offices were occupied by protesters, it would have been disbanded. So it had to be some type of Russian PR and LPR. So, and I was talking about how these lies work in the media and how the Russians are winning the social media angle, and that they're succeeding in the areas of fourth generational warfare, in the areas of new media and information technologies. And I've just reported very objectively about it.
Yeah,
that's where I am with Russia. But where I am with Morris is, I have tremendous affection for the guy. I really like him personally. I've spent many hours talking to him. And then last year, getting through to him every day while he was in the hospital in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. and working on his case afterwards, because they were trying to give him a crazy bill and advising him with the embassy, and the fundraising aspect of it was crazy. And I mean, Morris has a lot of supporters, and they're all really good people by and large, and everyone donated and gave because they believe in what he's doing. And I think, and this is not like the Morris, ass-licking competition here, but I really think his work on Gaddafi was very good, and on Ukraine was good. But I did start to see how, so basically, like I said, honest people can have honest differences. I don't agree with him that the truth has no friends. I think that being tactless will lose you friends, and I think that being inflexible or unwilling to hear another person speak the same truth in a different language will earn you no friends. That is true. But the truth alone will win you friends. I think people are drawn to the truth. I think that if that's really his, but to belabor the point, but if that's really, and I suspect it's not, but if that's really his perspective on truth, that you're telling the truth if you're turning people off, that's a very fucked up interaction with truth. That's a very fucked up interaction or connection to make.
I agree, Joaquin, with you. And I am Russian citizen. My passport is Russian. Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you on the multipolar worldview. Many people say that Russia just strives to replace America in the place of the world hegemon. That is
no,
that is
that's
not true.
culturally, politically, and economically impossible. That's what's going on right now. You think really, is anyone really think that Russia's going to dominate China or India
No.
or Iran? I mean, Russia could not.
We could dominate Iran, but not China or India.
I think that Russia could dominate Iran. I think that because the world is not in a vacuum, you don't just compare national armies. You got to look at resources and political instability and the blocks it would create, and definitely countries that weren't Iran's friends necessarily before would group up. I mean, it would definitely bring, it could bring Pakistan and India together to back Iran. It could bring Afghanistan much closer to Iran, and so forth. I mean, let's be real. But my point is not that I wish to see don't do the and I don't Monday morning quarterback old conflicts either. That's pointless to me. It's counterfactual history is retarded as a rule. But when it comes to these questions that you raise, I really think that the truth has to be expressed, but it's I don't take a fatalistic everything is lost view. I think that the human spirit is very resilient, and I think you made a very good point about technological backwardsness. Even though I'm a critic of modernity, and I disagree with the narrative that things are getting better, that doesn't mean there's any going back, because the technology exists, and so in the 19th century in England, there was a sort of early nascent sort of anarchist movement, but they weren't like continental anarchists. They had a belief that there would be like a fictional king that they were subordinate to, called King Lud, who was a fictional sort of king of the anarchists that they invented. And in this mythology, he comes in and destroys the machines. And so this was the time of wreckers and sabotage. The workers then, simple mill workers and higher skilled tradesmen were bemoaning the onset of the changes to work and to professionalism and to the crafts and trades that was brought about by the Industrial Revolution in England. This is like the world of Charles Dickens, like Oliver Twist and all that, and the smokestacks and the poverty and the filth of England, and from which it's never recovered, I suppose. And one of the things in this story is that they're going to destroy all the machines. In reality, you can't destroy all the machines. I think that's what the whole Matrix is about, and the Terminator is about. There will be some issue with machines in the future, but if you do it on a national level, like, for example, if ISIS, let's pretend in some magical world that ISIS is not controlled by fully modernized, countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey. I mean, modern, I mean that they don't have some perspective of being against modernity. I'm not saying that they're Western democracies or that's, but the Saudi monarchy or the Turkish Republic are modern states, and they rely on modern technologies, and they import export and things like that. So let's pretend that Al Qaeda and ISIS are not connected, are not controlled, by these powers, and aren't working hand in hand with Israel and the United States. Let's just pretend for a minute that they actually say what they mean or mean what they say, and let's also insert words in their mouth, and let's say that they're against all these things, that they're in favor of Islamic banking and all these things that they've never really clarified. Then so what? You're going to reproduce what? So then if you're against, you're not going to have factories. What are you going to do? How are you going to defend yourself? How are you not going to be invaded?
Yes, because backward societies will be smashed by the more advanced societies, and I believe this is
backward societies are always going to right.
Yeah, and that is what Stalin actually said, and he said something like, "We are backward from the Western countries for like 15 or 100 years. If we don't catch up with them, we will be crushed." He said something like that.
Right. Well, it's a fair point. I mean, it's like you can't have an anti-modern revolution in a sphere. The technology is going to, in my view, technology is going to evolve in a dialectical way. It's going to have some contradictions in it, not in the Hegelian or Marxist sense of contradictions, but there are, but in a way related to Hegel's idea of a contradiction, but also in terms of consciousness. I think that human beings are changing and will keep changing, not fundamentally, but in all of the inessentials, which are predominant, in fact, and only then and later in the future will people be able to use different technologies in a different way. But we live in this age, we live in this time, and so I think there's a certain logic to how things work right now. I think that I think we live in a time where you can, change who controls things. You can change what the aim of your society is. You can change what the ethos of your society is. You can change how wealth is distributed. You can change how wealth is created. You can change what's considered wealth, but you really can't change what's considered power. You can change what's considered status. You can say, oh, well, we're not going to promote rock stars and porn stars. We're going to promote priests, or we're going to promote scientists or astronauts or whatever. So you can change these things in a society. And I think a lot of those things should change in the West. But you can't you can't eliminate your factories and say we're going to all, smoke hashish around campfires for the next 10,000 years and no one's going to fuck with us, because that's not true. I would love for people to be able to smoke hashish around campfires for the next 10,000 years and not have to. If people could just live with their children and their families and believe in the gods, and people would get sick and die and they know they were going to some better place, and if life had a meaning and created a purpose, and if people lived in, like these 20,000-year-old villages and tribes, that would be a fantastic thing, but it's not going to happen. Yeah. And you can't create islands for this to happen without it being a side project that's supported by a modern or postmodern type state. So you can create like a biosphere where you can see this, you can even replicate it, or you can study human interactions, or you can tell as many people who want to live in this way that they have to give up certain things to live in it, but there'd have to be a protectorate seeing over it. In other words, people would have to live on a reservation, but there'd have to be like a modern or kind of postmodern state that allows it, that's benign in some way, if there can be such a thing, that allows it to exist. But it couldn't be an independent force that is against other powers, because like you said, without industrialization, without these things, you're crushed by greater powers.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately the world we live in. So there's no viability of this ISIS project, even if we abstract away all the bullshit, and even if we were to say it's a real thing, it couldn't possibly exist. And that's the same thing I would tell to anarchists or to a few other groups of people who are kind of like ISIS.
Yeah, and Morris said that the Middle East and those who fight for a caliphate, why don't they have a caliphate? He said that those countries are entitled to a caliphate, and there is a room for a caliphate. I don't think it is possible for the reasons you have listed above. So what can you say?
Yeah, look, if you're, yeah, I mean, not ISIS's caliphate. I mean, thing is that there's been a few. You had the Abbasids, you had the Ottomans, you had, I guess, a few sort of caliphates in history, but they were all at the time the most modern states that existed, and they had navies and armies and
Yeah,
scientists and engineers, and um, they were at war with the Byzantines and the medieval European countries,
yeah,
and they, I mean, everyone was on the same page, right? And you got a sword, I need a shield. You have a flamethrower, I need a water bucket. I mean, it's all very, you need technology and counter technology. They didn't say, well, we disagree with all of this, and they lived in reality.
yes,
So yeah, but the thing is that, as a point of fact, what tends to happen to people, and I think, and I don't want to psychoanalyze. I'm going to tell you the truth, because everyone knows I talked to Morris plenty offline, and we had many conversations not recorded.
yeah,
And I hope this is not violating anyone's privacy. I hope he has said this publicly. I'll go out on a limb. Well, he told me that he talks to these caliphate types, and I don't think he was saying, I don't know if you mean actively or had in the past, but who are the pan-Arabists in his life is what I want to know. Because clearly, if your homies are caliphate types, then they're going to tell you what's good about it, and I can hear what's good about it. But if you're not hearing like the pan-Arabist side of it, or other political ideological movements, then you're not getting the whole story. He's kind of buying into some of this Sunni Shia stuff that exists, but in the region doesn't exist the same way, from what I understand. And I mean, I talked to Sharmai Narwani and Marwa Osman and many people from the Middle East who are experts. And I consult them regularly. I publish their work. They publish mine. We reference each other. I've done international conferences with them. I consider them to be authorities on the subject. Marwa, for example, is not secular. She's a pretty devout Shia Muslim, and she's a supporter of Hezbollah. And they're, I guess, theocratic. But she would recognize instantly a lot of the good things about pan-Arabism. The West, in particularly England and the Ottomans, at different times did try to exploit tribalisms and regionalisms, and on a macro scale, they appear as Sunni Shia conflict, but on the ground, they appear much more real and much more connected to things that actually affect people, not abstract religious arguments. But in the context of the war, for example, what would happen is a person, either real or as a false flag, would come in as Sunnis into a Shia enclave, and kidnap some people, machine gun some things, and blow up a building, and then leave. And then they'd leave their calling card, and it'd be like, oh, we did this to you, we're the Sunnis. And then the local people would be like, oh, I mean, in this, they created this dichotomy was created. It existed in the past, but there was centuries had gone by that these things didn't matter so much. And then the pan-Arab movement was secular.
yes. Hello.
and sought to bring in leadership around, well, Nasserism in Egypt. And all of this like went along fairly normally for 3 or 4 decades, and then in the 70s it really began to fall apart. I think probably the 1968 war was the rock upon which Pan-Arabism was smashed. And the following decades were just, pittering away. And then the collapse of the Soviet Union really undermined the basis for there to be any kind of non-aligned movement. Really successful in having a coup within the coup in Iraq. So you had a Ba'athist and nationalist coup followed by a Ba'athist coup followed by Saddam's Ba'athist coup, and that one was basically very CIA oriented, and as a consequence, actually Iraq of Saddam allied with Iran of Shah Pahlavi, and they made CENTO, which was like the NATO of the Middle East, and it was a NATO-based organization, and this separated really finally Syria from Iraq, even though they were both Ba'athist states. But then after 79, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, then you saw Iraq declare war on revolutionary Iran, and then ties between Iran and Syria finally blossomed to where they are right now. Hafez Assad had been since the early 70s trying to have good ties with Pahlavi as well. And we're also trying to shore up what Sadat had done to Egypt following Nasser. So both Hafez and in Egypt, both in Syria and in Egypt in 70 and in 72 respectively, had what were called the corrective revolutions. And forgive me if I've made any mistakes, this is all off the top. And these corrective revolutions were actually had some liberalizing elements to them that were kind of anti-socialist or pro-market reforms. I don't want to hear what people think about von Mises or the Austrians. This is reality I'm talking about. And what ended up happening, I'm not talking about normative, I'm talking about positive historical analysis. What ended up happening, and maybe it's because they didn't do market reforms enough, one can argue, but what ended up happening is it increased the disparity between rich and poor. Although the poor got wealthier, the rich got much wealthier. Is that good? Is that bad? Those are moral questions. I don't know. I'm only telling you what happened. And but this increased the conflict in society. Apparently, it doesn't matter if people get wealthiher, because wealth is relative. It matters. The disparity of wealth is more important than how much wealth a person has. So all of these are very important to understanding Syria and how ISIS came about. And it seems that really finally Hafez and his son Bashar really did try to include a lot of these like Sunni scholars and get support from the Sunni, which is the majority of the society, communities. And tried to incorporate and get basically the Sunnis to recognize Shias as Muslim and to recognize Alawites as Shias and by extension, therefore, as Muslims. And there had been dissension within Sunnism, and basically you ended up with Sunni clerics who were pro Syrian government, and then those who were connected to the Saudis primarily that were against it. And so this network of Saudis then evolved through the UN and through a whole different angle where they got in very tight with all of the UN-backed official NGOs, which a country usually must accept to be considered in the good graces on issues of human rights with the UN. And it was really that became the undoing of Syria because all these NGOs were brought in under neoliberal reforms as requirements to be considered up to standard on human rights but the Saudis were heavily invested in backing these NGOs on the UN level, and basically became extensions of Saudi and Turkish and Qatari foreign policy in Syria. And you had, years and years for these people to make connections. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, organizing in there for years and years. The point is that through all of this, it had nothing to do with what everyday people on the street felt and thought. There are big philosophical questions that are raised time and time again about agency. When people vote for something or support something, where did they get the idea to do that? How much is it based in propaganda versus their own experiences and their own cognitive? How do you separate what you read from what you thought on your own? I mean, where do you divide that line? And do you really choose what you think, or do you just end up or wind up believing things because of the environments that you're in? I mean, how much agency do we have? We have some, but how much do we have? So Russian workers, and there were 5 million of them in 1917, supported the Russian Revolution. That's fairly democratic. They supported Bolshevism. Now, does that legitimize the revolution? Some would say yes, others would say no. Some would say no because the workers were propagandized and their agency was compromised. But then weren't they being propagandized by the Tsar? Isn't everyone propagandized all the time? So where do you draw the line? Now, were there villages and tribes and towns that when ISIS came in, they were hailed as liberators? Yes, there were.
I absolutely
Yes, there were. And if Morris wants to say that, yes, he's right. Now, did they have popular support in these areas? Yes, they did. And it's accurate to say that. Now,
okay, I never said that Morris, I never said that there were no areas in Syria where ISIS was, hailed as liberators. I never, of course, there were such areas. But,
right.
But what I said once is that that ISIS propaganda machine also works, and propaganda is a big factor here. And
yes.
have you heard that there were actually rebellions, uprisings in Raqqa against ISIS?
Yes.
Because people are tired of their occupation, I think.
Yes. I think that points to that. Now, the thing is that there's truth in things, and people can get confused by the truth, and there's truth in what Morris is saying. And the thing about agency is, if you had a village, okay, let's say a town, let's say a suburb of outside of Homs. So since basically the 70s, the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria was pretty much stamped out. You might have had an occasional lone terrorist act or something, but it was mostly stamped out. And they then basically tried to incorporate support from the community being Sunnis. But when first of all, there were still ongoing opposition for religious reasons or tribal, ethnic, sort of ethno-religious reasons in Syria to oppose the government. But all this money coming in, printing leaflets, making videos, making movies, all this money coming in from these UN-backed NGOs, and then later directly from Turkey and Qatar. Once you had the actual ISIS formations on the ground, and the money could go directly in. They did like what the Black Panthers did in some ways. I mean, they did what Hezbollah does in many ways. They did what any kind of state within a state does when you're trying to take power, is that you build a government. And so did they make preschools? Yes, they made preschools. Did they have like school lunch programs or whatever? Yes, they did. Did they build soccer goal posts for kids to play? Yes, they did. Okay, but the girls couldn't play. But yes, they did do these things. And for decades before that, through the UN and George Soros-backed NGOs, had been propagating these they looked really benign at first, because like, well, what's the connection between soccer fields and the goal of Saudi Arabia to invade Syria or ISIS? There was none. And of course, Syrian state had their intelligence and were worried about it, but you start arresting human rights workers. I mean, remember that Syria was already in the crosshairs of the U.S. since when Iraq was invaded in 2003,
Yeah.
2003.
Yeah, 2003.
And that's when they really began to like really up the tempo of taking in all of these ultimately Saudi-backed NGOs through the UN structures. That's what created the popular support. So that's where the question of agency comes in. That's a very complex human question that I don't have the experience or insight to really answer. But so what I need to know is a foreign state backing this stuff get imported? Because that's a subjective question, or you have to like be almost like a neuropsychologist or something, and then combine social psychology. I mean, it's really a question about free will and determinism. That's an endless debate. Yeah. But what you can objectively say is that, yes, the Israelis and the Americans and the Turks and the Saudis were all financially supporting this movement. And another fact is that if you put enough money into something, people will support it. If you play the same fucking song on the radio enough times, it becomes a hit.
Yeah.
I was a union organizer, and we would maybe go into a shop and they didn't want a union. But if we organized enough, then soon we'd have 55%, and we vote a union in, and that's how it works. So you don't always
repetitive exposure.
Repetitive exposure. It's manufactured consent. You know, it works everywhere. So you know, so that's why for me the question about what the people really wanted or what the people really thought is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Is not that interesting to me on this question. Yeah. It's very interesting to me on other questions. The methodology to determine that, like I said, I don't possess. But what the methodology and what I do have the right to speak upon, and why I went to school is to talk about what we can objectively establish. And in that area, okay, it's foreign backed. Now we talk about rules and rights. You can't talk about these morality things because everyone has a different moral framework. So international relations is based upon all the rules of the game that people agree to. For example, if you and I are playing Monopoly, and I draw the card, go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200, well, that's what I have to do. Now, I might say it's not fair, and I can argue why I shouldn't do that. Well, because you owned all the property, and then you rolled the dice, and my hand slipped, and whatever. But that's not how games are played. And we went into the game agreeing on certain rules, and maybe we had a big fucking war before we arrived at those rules in order to have those rules. So the rules are very important because without them you get world wars. And the present paradigm was developed after the conclusion of World War II. And that's why you have the Nuremberg contributing to Geneva, and you have the whole post-colonial period after World War II, and then the creation of the UN Charter, the rights of self-determination, and so forth. Now, when you talk about changes to the international order, for example, Helsinki was at 1976. Well, there they talked about, the borders of states can be changed, but they have to be the product of internal processes of that state. In other words, it can't be an abrogation of the other important thing, which is the right of nations to self-determination. So not all states represent homogeneous nations, and so then you have at times, therefore, minority nations, if they're concentrated in a geographic area, who may want to push for a redivision of the state towards their national self-determination. So there are complex issues, but the way that they've been resolved so far has been imperfect, but because the countries involved or the divisions made we're not going to end the world. Ways that the rules were broken have been tolerated, or ways that the rules have been enforced were tolerated. So I know I've been very wordy with this. I'm trying to deliver as much background and information that I think is necessary.
That's totally fine.
Thank you. I think that some answers are simple, but I think if people wanted a simple answer, they could come up with it themselves, or they could read a very short blurb, or they can get on Twitter. People want to hear from me really to dig into it, and that's what I do. And so what happened with how I think Morris, and like I say it with great respect and admiration for the man, how he lost the track, how he lost the plot on this particular story. And I want to say again that privately that I would go back onto his show. This is before all of this. I told him long ago when we were talking about how I didn't want to do more shows. It really wasn't over these differences. I just thought it was overexposure, and I didn't like the way he asked questions. I didn't like the folks that was just not how to explain or understand the world completely. And also I thought that I raised the issue about how I thought he was feeding into the very wrong narrative about ISIS, but it wasn't him. That's the problem. I think, like I said, he's got principles. The problem is the audience, and I'm not, I'm not getting paid for this. I get paid for other shit. I don't get paid for this. And if I'm just going to go on YouTube, I don't have my own channel. I don't get subscriptions and put ads up and shit. I don't have, that's not remote. So I don't have to troll for headlines or say sensationalist things. And I'm not suggesting he does or needs to either, but I've never presented anything other than my analysis. So when you had the Pan-Arabism destroyed, of course, opened the door for all these things. I mean, Lebanon was crazy. You had the bombing of Beirut, and this was like considered Paris on the Mediterranean, Paris of the Levant. And Lebanon's a beautiful country. And then you had the Israeli occupation, the Syrian kind of liberation, counter-occupation. When you had in 2004, 2005, you had the assassination of Hariri, who was an anti-Syrian guy, and of course Syria was blamed for that. And you've had this like conflict for a long time in Lebanon between the March 14th and March 8th movements, and I think that the withdrawal of Syria from Lebanon opened the door for Israel to invade Lebanon and for Hezbollah to kick the IDF's butt back to Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big thing. That all matters. This is not 1965. This is like just when was that? 2007? 2006? Yes. And maybe for people, this seems like a long time ago. For me, this was yesterday. I think I still have the same pair of jeans I wore in 2006. So I still talk to the same people I talked to in 2006. I mean, for me, this is not a different period. I mean, I understand it is, but I'm very, I'm almost 40 years old, so it's not that long ago for me, is what I'm saying. And
and I remember, I remember the Russian media coverage of this war, and the Russian media coverage was, in favor of Lebanon, and that Lebanon was invaded by Israel, and Israel destroyed, just obliterated half of the country.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative was different in the U.S. They Americans, who I think were pro-Hariri, but mean the government. But it's what it is really is talk about ISIS. I'm getting back to like Morris and trying to explain to people how I feel about Morris. I'm trying to explain what we both think.
Yeah.
It's like yeah, it's true that there's different ISISes, and
Yeah,
like the way it's presented is holographic, and yes, like certain things are sensationalized, and yes, it's true that like in some parts of the country, more popular invasion meant to carve up the country and to balkanize it like they did to Yugoslavia, to break it apart into pieces, and to have that Israel can get access to, whether it's oil or water or whatever. Israel needs water. Dr. Osman, Marwa Osman, studies the issue of water rights and Israel very closely, and it may surprise people how much this conflict relates to that. And so it has nothing to fucking do with the caliphate is the thing. So now here's the other thing, because I do talk to Muslims, Islamic scholars. I talk to the Sheikh Imran Hussein. I talk to Shia scholars as well. And I'll tell you that in the Quran, the word caliphate doesn't exist, doesn't appear. I think twice or three times the word caliph
yeah,
appears, but that's a person, or that is it's not a state. It's not a state. It's not a government. It's not a regime. It's not a government. It's a inheritance, or like when a king has a son who's a prince, and he hands the right to rule to his son. That's the caliph.
yeah,
So they say that the in the Quran they say that the first caliph was handed directly, you know, I don't know if it was from, and forgive my ignorance here, but it was handed basically by God uh, down, and that is a reference to caliph or caliph. But you could go probably anywhere in the Middle East in the 1970s. You can go anywhere in the Levant in the 1970s, 1980s, and you could ask people in villages, oh, are you Sunni? Well, okay, I guess, yeah, we're Sunni, sure. I mean, it means nothing because everyone here is Sunni, fine. And do you want a caliphate? And they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah,
I want to, like buy a new tractor for my field, and want to make sure that my daughter finishes engineering school, and I want to make sure my tax burden is normal and that the roads work. I mean, what do you mean you want a caliphate? Such a freaking Asperger's question. So fucking abstract. It's not what people, I mean, philosophers and ideologists and leaders, talk about crazy shit. People don't want crazy shit. People just want normal. This is an industry, and people didn't want 12th century things. The whole reason that Pan-Arabism was a huge success and spread throughout the region, and even elements of Pan-Arabism were absorbed and contemplated later, both by Muslim Brotherhood and by separately the Ayatollah Khomeini,
yeah,
were because it related to practical questions in life, economic, political questions, secular questions. So even religious movements in the past, whether it's the Islamic Republic or Amal or Hezbollah in Lebanon, they address secular issues. They don't just world homes and we're just going to blow up everything and do like the final 5 minutes of Fight Club or something, because that's not realistic. And no one wants that. People wouldn't say, yes, destroy my tractor, give me 10 mules instead. I mean, no one's going to say that, right? It's just not a thing that people ever would say. I mean, let's be realistic. So this idea that Sunnis want a caliphate, so they should have a caliphate, this gets into questions about representative politics. So you're going to have one Sunni say he represents everyone who he calls a Sunni, or you're going to get 5 Sunnis who say they represent all these people who don't know who the fuck they are, and say, well, we're Sunni leaders, and then these are all Sunnis. You get that everywhere in the world. Bullshit. It's called collectivism. But it's collectivism of representational politics. So you get demagoguery and all these funny little processes in there. They don't represent. No one represents anyone. Like if only in a very limited sense, in a certain context and certain procedures and about certain things. But I mean, if I nominate someone to the school board and stuff, it doesn't mean that I think that they're telling me how to wash my hands or what to eat, you see. So people delegate certain authorities and certain responsibilities to others. There's a theory about government and human agency. Again, I don't want to get too abstract, but you can clearly see that the point that if someone wants to say that all Sunnis want such and such, it's not even true to say that the majority of Sunnis wanted that, or that they wanted that as Sunnis, or that their Sunniism was the essential component of their identity, because it was not. It's been made that way more recently, and that's problematic. But
Absolutely.
so that's basically my take on it. I know my view is nuanced, and it goes like this and shit, but that's how reality works. And I appreciate had also a nuanced view, but he seemed to essentialize that there was a core truth to the ISIS movement which legitimizes it, despite the actual demonstrably evident, empirically provable aims that it's being driven towards. So in other words, I'm taking a materialist and positivist approach to understanding the phenomenon, and not a esoteric, obscurantist, mysticist view. I like esotericism. I like mysticism. I think that it does have a lot to do with what drives a lot of human things. They are irrational. I do think the human experience is fundamentally irrational, but I don't think that therefore someone who says that they're irrational is driven by irrationality. I'm not convinced. Not when you're taking the oil and selling it to the Turks. And I don't believe that you're against the evils of the modern world when you kidnap girls and sell them into slavery. Yeah. I'm just not. It doesn't jive with me. It's very hard to sell me that. Yeah. Very hard to sell me that.
Yes.
Now,
what is this thing that legitimizes ISIS even a little bit? So what is that?
Okay. Well. So what legitimizes it is that it has fundamentally appeals to, that's a different question, what it appeals to. But I think that what it appeals to is part of its legitimacy. So that's what I will speak to.
Yeah.
Let's say you're a young man and you're living in a society and there's a lot of changes going on, and people who may not know, in countries like Syria and Lebanon, things cost a lot different. Costs are distributed differently. It's not as backwards as people in America might imagine.
Yeah.
A person might make 500 euros a month, and they think, oh my God, how do they live? But their rent is only like 200 euros a month. And while their smartphone might cost a few $100s, it might come for free with their post-paid package, and they might only pay like 10 or 15 euros a month to have broadband access on their smartphone. So this has changed how people access information, but it is also connected to explaining how technology and progress affects in a way that's combined and uneven development. So, or Saudi Arabia. So what has happened is there's been, I have my own theory. So there's been a global desecularization process. A foreign imposed are becoming more religious at the same time. So, and what is happening is that when the religiosity increases in this faith, it becomes very difficult for young men to like find a girlfriend. And if she's on her smartphone and she's getting likes from dudes all over the world, then she's not looking for male attention in her community. And I don't think people understand that people that you might think are very poor because they live in Syria, these girls have like smartphones, okay? And so young men are going, this is a Western cancer, and they may not be psychologically aware of the fact that their extremism is being driven by their lack of access to sex. So there was a few psychoanalysts at the time in the 1930s in Germany, and I hate to get into reductio ad Hitlerum here. But there was one psychoanalyst named or in government or in civil society, and what he noted was that in the way that sexuality had been regulated, that the sexual repressive mechanism had been increased in order to increase their fanaticism. So in other words, there's a direct correlation between not getting sex and becoming more fanatical. So there's a pretty funny meme I saw about like it's like a kid. It's like different men in different stages of life, and the first one is like 12 years old. I just had sex, and it's like, okay, like quite a bit young, but okay. And then the 15-year-old, oh, I just made sex. This is cool. Okay, right age for that. And then the next guy is 20, like hasn't had sex yet, you know. And he's like, that's okay because I have Lord of the Rings and I have, you know. It's like, what do you mean? I have Magic the Gathering. And then they've got like a 40-year-old and he's like become a warlock, you know. And they've got 50-year-old and he's like, the age of man has come to an end, and he's totally, you know, he's LARPing as a wizard. And believes he's in some science fiction fantasy world. And I think that is a very good meme. You should put it up. We'll put it up. Everyone will see it. Because it explains the connection between extremism and sexualization. So that's part of it. That's, I think, a fundamental truth, though, is that technology is creating new gender questions, and then these foreign NGOs were coming in and teaching a different view about sex and gender that was happening at the same time as a contradiction with increased desecularization, increased religiosity. And this was intended to happen. So the goal was to tear Syria apart. And so they were increasing the religiosity and increasing the liberalism at the same time, you see, because that's going to tear society apart. So, but there is a problem with modernity. There is a problem with modernity, and ISIS does talk about that problem. So that's the element of truth. I mean, we can think about the property sector, a criticism of the modern world paradigm. They're Russophobic, they're idiots, they're controlled by Goldman Sachs,
Yeah.
But what they believe is going on is different, and what they believe is, and there's a fundamental truth in there, is that there is something very wrong with the Ukrainian oligarchy that they were against, even though they supported it in the end. There was something very wrong with this game of either Russia or the EU exerting all this power on Ukrainian people, but really we mean Galicians. And so I think these Galician had some element of truth, but we live in difficult times where the vehicles that we try to resolve these problems, or that we get on the wrong one, we go down, there's many blind alleys, there's many dead-end streets in this collective human experience trying to deal with these problems. So that's the fundamental truth of ISIS. There's a truth there. On another level, more shit doesn't make you happy, and secular pan-Arabism, the standard of living in all the countries where it was, in Egypt, Iraq, Syria, in a different way, but for similar reasons. The revolution in Iran accomplished similar things. But they were trying to build modern states, and so you're inherently buying into it's kind of like reality, because you just, like you say, if you're not going to modernize, you're going to be destroyed. So, there's these contradictions that have come up in human development. So, yeah, there's a criticism to modernity. There's a criticism to this process, and the fact that we're forced into it. And, you're forced into it. Like, you can say I'm against guns, but then when someone's shooting at you, you need guns
to defend yourself.
Have a gun factory means you need engineers, and to have engineers means you need universities. And see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So every part of your society is supported by this large infrastructure, and it's very complex, and the people are individuated, and they have all these different tasks and educational careers, and it's not just like the campfire and you're the hunters and we're the gatherers, and way complex. So I think that there is a madness to the daily life, and people, even in modernity, even when standards of living were increasing, even though they could put more food on the table, things like self-respect were redefined, the professions were reinforced, the definition of happiness changed, and I think people have died less from curable diseases, but have died more from war as a result of modernity. So there's a give and take. Is a life that's very long a better one than a better life that's shorter? I mean, so there's qualitative versus quantitative questions that all get into these questions about quality of life.
Yeah.
So sometimes less is more. So I think that this is some truth in this ISIS thing, but I think that is not the truth, and it's not what's essential about them. That's explaining, in other words, why a person who is somewhat rational could join them, not for the mercenary reasons or drug. I'm not talking about the criminals, drug addicts, and mercenaries who join, but I'm talking about the unskilled fighters who were idealists, usually men in their teens and 20s and 30s,
yeah,
who heard the call to jihad and believe that they are good men and want to make God happy and do God's word, and maybe in some way make the world a better way if there's some secular perspective at all, but certainly they believe these things on a certain level because they denounce, crimes that are made not against religion but against people. So, there's also more than one ISIS. Like, it's not the same. Like, the thing is, yeah, there was an uprising in Raqqa. Generally, though, there weren't uprisings. So, and I'm not saying that maybe people were scared, but there are certainly areas where there was a lot of support. But you have to understand that ISIS has different teams. There's people who are more on the civil society end of things, and they are more connected to these NGOs that were, and they come in and they can show a good face to the villagers and do normal things and reorganize the village in a normal way. I think it is true that ISIS is somewhat misrepresented with the head chopping thing, because they're not all mostly head choppers. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were people fighting under the ISIS banner who were told that some of the head chopping videos that they saw on their smartphones were fake, that they didn't do it, but some other people did it. Okay. Also, it's a special team. It's like a death squad within ISIS that has the authority to go do these things, and they're special cases, and that's why they televise them. But it's not like they go into a village and decapitate 100 people, and every village they go into they decapitate 100 people. It just didn't work that way. You would have had many more Rakas if that was the case. And it's simply economically, it is much cheaper to rule by consent than to rule by force. So you just get a lot more support and a lot more volunteers and basically free work and shit like that if you are more popular. And if you're feared, then people are very reluctant to do things, so they're afraid of doing something wrong, or they don't want to be in the spotlight at all. So in occupations, in wars, winning the war for hearts and minds is a very big thing. My point is that we would be stupid to think that ISIS didn't try to win hearts and minds. Yeah. I think is the best way to summarize my point. It would be stupid to think that they didn't do what anyone else would do. Okay, yeah, I mean, and we have to separate, mythology about war from reality about war. And Morris is right that a lot of mythology about ISIS dominated the discourse about it. My point is that it doesn't matter. They could be sent by Jesus Christ or Muhammad on a human rights brigade and only come with unicorns and rainbows and only cut off the heads of anal rapists or something like that. And it still wouldn't change the fact that in the context of internet and what compels a country to act, whether it's Israel or Russia or Germany, there's rules of gravity, and then there are rules, there are de facto rules, and there are de jure rules, and you got to respect them. They exist. Paradigm, we're in it.
Yeah.
This idea that Russia's going to break out of the global consensus paradigm overnight or over a pretext like Syria. No, the world is changing, of course. The consensus is changing. But it doesn't happen. There are moments that are catalysts, but it's not going to be like, you're not going to see Putin or Lavrov be like Gaddafi at the UN and tear up the charter in front of the podium. And it's not going to be like the Russian delegation during the Korean War, and they will walk out or something of the Security Council. And it's not going to go. I mean, it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen over Syria. Not in 2016, and not before. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the thing, is that it's easy to pot shot from the sidelines, and it's easy to say, well, this is wrong because of some other fictional construct, better way I have to do it. So you can't really judge reality. It's very hard to judge reality by some other fictional construct that you say is better, and then you're going to hold all of reality accountable to your, solipsist, kind of narcissistic view of how things should be. Russia lives in the real world. It exists, and it must interact with states within some boundaries that resemble how things work in the world. And so it's good to study things like IR or global politics and things like that, even at a university, even for free, because most professors will let you sit in. You don't need a degree to know these things or to learn them, but there are, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You're not going to go to the Rense or what really happened. You're not going to listen to Michael Rivero or something, to learn about what the people running things learned in school to make decisions. You can say they're wrong, but you have to know what they think to say what's wrong. And so you have to study the classics. You have to study, your core periphery theory, your three worlds theory. You have to study your global politics in general. You have to study your IR, your realism school, your idealism school. And then you can say, well, they shouldn't, or they're applying it wrong, or it's the wrong idea. But you got to know what the ideas are first. You're not going to get that from alternative media, really. I mean, so people are very good at, should be, but they're not always very good at describing why it is what it is right now. And I don't claim to be a master or a doctor or expert on the whole world, but on certain subjects, I work very hard to study them and to try to explain them to people. So that's where I'm at with ISIS. I mean, so abstracting away these like moral, esoteric and moral categories and things like that, which no one's going to agree on. You got to look at what are the normal actions and reactions of the various actors. Just act normal for a minute. If the I'm going to paraphrase someone who's a friend of mine on social networking and said something really intelligent, and I'm going to say it like this. So if migrants from India move to York and then they one day declare themselves Yorkians, and then they say that all the English people living in York have invaded them, that this is how you might explain, for example, in a country like Syria, where you had people of mixed, of different ethnic groups living in a single enclave. One group suddenly declares that they're the real group that belongs there, and declares the other group to be takfiris, or takfirs, or people who are breaking law, and they will completely change our perception of who belongs there. So when the U.S. is talking about dividing up Syria, you don't just get to say that wherever a dude from ISIS drove his Toyota truck through in a video is ISIS territory, and you can't just say that everywhere that Sunnis live support ISIS. Mm-hmm. You just can't say that. It's just not true. It can't be proven, and we can't assume it from what we know 100 years of history of the region. So Muslim Brotherhood is almost 100-year-old conspiracy. It was built by the English. Muslim Brotherhood is the basis of the FSA, of the Syrian Transitional National Council, or the Syrian National, or the Council of National Transition for Syria. Whatever you want to call it, it's had 4 different names, official names. Yeah. But it's always been a Muslim Brotherhood front. And the fundamental difference between the Muslim Brotherhood, who are, one would argue, Salafists, and the Wahhabis, is that, yes, the Muslim Brotherhood did support the idea of running an electoral campaigns. They did. It's kind of like the difference between the revolutionary communists and the socialists. To separate, to understand difference in practice, the socialists will say, oh, no, we can elect socialists into office within a non-socialist society and then reform that society through elections. So that's what the Muslim Brotherhood has had as a position. That's why they ran Morsi in Egypt in the elections. Yeah. That's why they supported Erdogan in Turkey, in the elections. Now, Wahhabis are more like anarchists or like the revolutionaries and say, no, none of that. Everything is wrong. You got to tear the whole world down and rebuild it from the start, or we can't build the world, because the world is inherently an illusion, or it's inherently problematic, or, whatever. So, you can see there's a difference, but when it came to this ISIS phenomenon, there's many different ISISes. Clearly, we'd be stupid to think that there weren't situations where they came in as ISIS, and then when the CNN cameras came in, they put up the FSA flags and called themselves moderates. Stupid not to think that. And we'd also be stupid to think that every ISIS group that took over a town came in with that head chopping brigade with them. They don't always travel with that much smaller group of executioners. So I'm not condoning it, but I'm also trying to move past the polarization, and I think that Morris failed to get past the polarization, because while he could sense that the Western narrative was hyperventilating on ISIS as a pretext to make war, that's true. He swung the other way and said, therefore, ISIS is something that we should kind of support, or we should be against the people who are against them. And that's where he's wrong, and that's what I've spent this, I hope not too long, of your audience's time trying to dig into the nuances.
No, it's okay. And I absolutely enjoy listening to you, even though it's late and I'm getting a little bit sleepy. But still,
Exhausted.
yeah, but still, you are right, and Morris is wrong. That ISIS, I understand there are different ISISes, and ISIS has popular support, and not all ISIS members are merciless head choppers. But anyway, I think what Russia and Syrian Arab Army does, it is all right, and ISIS should be and must be defeated.
I'm with you on that. I do think that, and it's for me, and I hate to be selfish, I don't really think that it's a question about what's good for Russia or
What's good
for Syria. Yeah. For me, it has to do with the whole world and this question of multipolarity and its geopolitics. I am a religious person, spiritual also.
Well,
But I don't.
I'm not an atheist. I'm religious too.
Right, and I think that while that's true, I can I sense that there's something going on in the world which is beyond. It's very wrong, but it's beyond the standard kind of Marxist materialist understanding of what's wrong. I think it's deeper than that. I think there's many questions and mysteries about human origins and human reality and human potential that are completely beyond the present mainstream scientific paradigm. That's just my view. I don't have a right to have that view in a scientific or academic sense, but I think that does inform my orientation. But it allows me to also to connect and to understand better people like these Wahhabis. I can kind of get it. I mean, I'm not a person who thinks that, oh, well, look, you've increased literacy and you put more shoes on people's feet, therefore they're happier. I can see that they could be happier, but are they more satisfied? But I can also see that they might not end up either more satisfied or more happy. And secondly, are we fundamentally as human beings really trying to be satisfied? I mean, yes, we are, but is being satisfied the fundamental essence of the human experience, or is trying to get there I think it's trying to get there. I think that's evolution. I think we've evolved that way, and I think our spirituality is connected to that. I don't think that we can have it all in this world, either for evolutionary or for scientific reasons. I think for evolutionary reasons, or religious reasons, I think for scientific reasons, we're not evolved to find satisfaction. We would, if there was any time we'd be Zen or whatever and be in the moment. as a rule, like all the, yes, we're just fundamentally distribution within that moment permanently, and yes, could go back to the campfire and shit like that, meditate under the tree or whatever. But I don't think that's how people live. We evolved having problems, amoebas, whatever, single-celled animals eating each other, competition, acquiring resources. In the development of the human brain, it's like identifying problems. And I think even if we didn't have problems, we invent problems.
Yeah.
And then that raises the question of how many problems that we think exist we're actually just inventing. I think that people want to solve problems, and I think that we want to find satisfaction, but I don't think we actually like when the problem is solved. I don't think we actually like when we've reached satisfaction. I think we can experience a euphoria for a moment, but I don't think that if you build your house on the ocean and have a view of the ocean, I don't think you're going to appreciate it as much on the 600th day as you did on the first day. I think you'll take it for granted and even become bored and then look for the next thing. So I think that that's really what's going on with humans and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a human question.
We always need something to aspire to, don't we?
Yes, we need this. We need this. So this is why I have problems with secular eschatologies that promise to bring the kingdom of heaven onto earth to be experienced by this yuga. So that's, it's more than I like it that way. I would hate to think that I ran out of things to know or to learn about. Like I'm a baby, I'm a child, and I'm just, playing with little fucking blocks and trying to put the things close. That's where I'm at, literally. And I accept that. I'm not going to ever be more than that. Just,
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think, to wrap this up, or maybe you have anything else to say?
I just want to reiterate again, I am a Morris friend. I am a Morris fan. I'd be happy to talk on his show about another subject. But I don't support the views on ISIS, and I think that as a result of saying these kind of insufficiently unclear things or these wrong things about ISIS, that he's attracted a very bad audience. And not all of them, but he's got souls on there, and I'd be surprised if one of them wasn't on the Qatari payroll.
Yeah, sure. And I'm also, I'm still a fan of Morris. I didn't unsubscribe from him. I didn't delete him from Skype. And I'm also ready to appear on his show if he wants to interview me on any subject he's interested to hear my, Russian perspective from a Russian person. So yeah, basically, and his comment section under his ISIS videos, it seems to me that they are full of, these apologists of ISIS apologists or Muslim Brotherhood apologists, and still, it sometimes seems to me that Morris is trying to cater to them.
I do. I don't like it. I don't. I think he does. I mean, he tries to identify his audience. I think, and if you get 4,000 views on one video and 1,000 views on another, you go, oh, what did I talk about on the 4,000 views? Okay, can I talk about that again? I mean, that's some human nature shit. I think it makes sense.
Yes.
It seems that he lives off of the donations and the AdSense from the Google, but I think the donations are part of it, Sunnis outnumber Shias by a very wide margin in this world, and
it's like, 1 billion of Catholics and how many million Orthodox, and, 200 million Orthodox Christians or 300 million, I don't remember.
Right. Right. You've got basically a United States-sized population of Orthodox Christians in the world, and you've got
China's population of,
Africa and Latin America and parts of Western Northern Europe
yeah,
are all Catholic.
yeah, sure.
Right.
So yeah, to wrap this up, and I'm gonna start or stop recording. So yeah, Morris, we didn't mean to, offend you or anything. We are still, willing to. You are our friend, and we are still willing to see you and maybe to appear on your show. So basically, yeah. So maybe you add something to this.
Yeah, it's been a good show. Thank you for letting me dig in to the subject about ISIS, really, and something about Morris.
Yeah,
Uh, and yeah, it's the truth. I think will earn you friends is what I would disagree with Morris. I think the
has
truth earns you
friends. Yeah,
friends.
I agree. The truth has friends indeed. So yeah.
Yes,
So thank you for being on my show. So yeah, I hope to see you again. We need to talk about many things. I would like to talk to you, especially the Shesher thing. How did he get liberated? I mean,
yes.
so yeah. For now, it's too late where I live. So bye, Joaquin. Thank you very much.
Bye.